Hello, hello, and welcome once again to the David Messiah YouTube channel, where our watchwords are to teach and to build back up the kingdom of Zion. The title of this talk today is Venezuela, Guyana, and the land issue. Venezuela, Guyana, and the land issue. And it arises obviously because of the dispute that is now upon us between the two South American countries there, Venezuela and Guyana, over the province of Essequibo, which is now 2/3 of the landmass of Guyana and has been claimed now for a long time by Venezuela, going back to an arbitral award of 1899, when under some sort of arbitration arrangement, Venezuela essentially lost that land to the British when Britain was a sort of preeminent power in the world. And at the time that Guyana became independent, in early 1960s, I forget the exact year, the issue came up again, and I think the two countries had agreed to some kind of arbitration arrangement yet again, under the auspices of the United Nations, and after several decades of fruitless effort in that regard, it has been handed over, with the agreement of the parties, to the International Court of Justice. And so it is now before the International Court of Justice. But now recently, Venezuela has taken it upon itself to, and has so decided in a referendum internal to Venezuela, that land, the Essequibo region of now today Guyana, belongs to Venezuela. And so the implication is that, in a sense, the Venezuelan people have given the green light to the Venezuelan government to annex that landmass called the Essequibo. And it is now not just a sort of academic kind of an issue. There's a lot riding on it, because Essequibo is mineral rich, and in particular the sort of abutting sea offshore to the Essequibo has been found to be rich in oil. And Guyana has taken it upon itself to make arrangements with ExxonMobil, and I presume other oil companies as well, to set about exploiting that oil to Guyana's enrichment, so they hope. And Venezuela is having none of it, essentially, because they think that land belongs to them. And I'm sure they're right. I haven't sort of researched what went on in 1899 and prior to that, but we well know that there came a point in the early 1500s when the Pope divided up the so-called New World between the kings of Portugal and Spain. And that left no room for any other power, European power in particular. So it was only afterwards that Britain came, and France came, and the Dutch came, and in North America, well, that was Britain also initially, but morphing into the United States. They came. And so what had been the preserve of Spain and Portugal became, sort of a different sort of matter, with other powers also coming into it. So that's the sort of history. But even prior to that, what I want to do here in this talk now is to go back to the very beginning. And the very beginning is to be found in Scripture. That's where in the end, we're going to have the ultimate resolution of these matters. The Most High had me, as I said on a number of occasions, in the very first upload to this YouTube channel, which was an audio letter of demand upon the Catholic Church and upon the so-called State of Israel, 1948 State of Israel. And in that letter of demand, as it pertained to the so-called State of Israel, what he had me to do was to issue what in effect was an eviction notice. And that eviction is being carried out now in that inheritance land of Israel. I don't think they are wise to that yet, but that is what is going on, because we are now in the end times. And so the issue of the land and who owns the land is now coming up front and center. And we see that here in Psalms number 2, verse 8. And I'll start at verse 7. I will declare the decree. Yahweh had said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And the reference there is to the David Messiah. And in verse 8, ask of me, in other words, the Most High is saying to that David Messiah, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. So obviously it is the Most High that owns the land, and that is certainly clear in the book of Exodus, chapter 19. And I'll start at verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and Yahweh called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine. Whose is it? All the earth is mine. And this is what now the Most High Yahweh is saying. And there can't be anybody to kind of contradict or to dispute that. He created it, therefore he owns it, and therefore he can do with it as he pleases. So, and we just read in Psalms number 2, where he is saying that he will, all that David Messiah has to do is ask of him, and the entire earth, the uttermost parts of the earth shall be given unto him. And furthermore, the heathen would be given unto him as an inheritance. Now the heathen powers are essentially the colonial powers, those powers that went into lands that did not belong to them, to rape, to pillage, to plunder, to colonize, to enslave. That's what heathen literally means. It doesn't mean, what is the belief system. It means what is their behavior. And the Spanish were a heathen power when they went into the New World. The British, the Portuguese, all these were heathen powers. But they were allowed to go into the New World and to do that thing because of this, what we see here in the book of Ether, which is taken from the book of Mormon, chapter 2, verse 9, where it says, and I read, quote, and now we can behold the decrees of God concerning this land, the reference here being to the Americas, that it is a land of promise, it is promised land. And whatsoever nation shall possess it shall serve God, or they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them, and the fullness of his wrath cometh upon them when they are ripened in iniquity. So the Americas are promised lands. Let me go to this is my own book, The Coming of David Messiah. Where the issue of land has been taken up more or less tangentially, but it is there. And it's not going into landscape mode for whatever reason. Let me try something here. There we go, auto rotate. Yes, so this is now from my own book. And this is a key point that it is important to understand. Read here in red, entitled Update/Commentary. The lands of Israel should be understood to include all those lands to which Israel and Judah were scattered. That is, there's a land of inheritance, the Israelite homeland, initially called the land of Canaan, and Israelites had to go in there and to evict the Canaanites and the Philistines. Didn't quite succeed in so doing, but that was their command to do that. But also the promised lands. And the promised lands are specifically referred to in the Book of Mormon. It's there in 1 Nephi chapter 13, verse 12. It's there in the sealed Book of Moses, chapter 12, verse 8. It is there in 2 Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 to 45. It is also there in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9. The promised land as opposed to the inheritance land, to which Israel and Judah later were scattered. All right, so we read in 2 Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 to 45. This was around 722 BC, at the time of the Assyrian captivity, when the northern tribes were scattered out of that land. And in 2 Ezra, that is referred to in chapter 13, where it says that they were scattered into lands where never before mankind dwelt. So that the Israelites became the aboriginal people in all those lands, and these are the promised lands now, where never before mankind dwelt. All right, now that needs a little further explanation, but let me carry on here reading. These promised lands include the Americas in particular, all of the Americas, North, Central, and South, but also far western and northwestern Europe, far eastern Asia, far southeastern Pacific, and the previously uninhabited parts of Africa, into which Israel and Judah were scattered in several waves. And where they were scattered are now the Negro/Bantu lands of Western Africa, Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Southeastern Africa, and Southern Africa. All these are promised lands. These promised lands are alluded to at Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9. Let's go there quickly. Where it says, and I read from verse 8, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Verse 9, for Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. So when he divided up the nations according to their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So he is suggesting that there is, in effect, an allotment according to the different sons of Adam, okay? And Israel is a sort of fulcrum point. And when Israel becomes essentially as the sands of the sea, Israel gets a huge portion. Now, there was, as was described at the book of Jubilees, Jubilees chapter 8, and this is here referenced in what I was reading here from my book, The Coming of David Messiah, and I'm making the distinction as to the promised lands. It's saying, continuing here in the middle of the page, these promised lands are lands that were not part of the division, Jubilees chapter 8, agreed to by the sons of Noah. We know for sure, as a matter of simple inference, that the Americas were not included in that Jubilees 8 division. In Jubilees chapter 8, if you recall, the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, agreed amongst themselves the division of the land, that land area that was more or less immediately surrounding the Mesopotamian region, to which they'd all sort of decamped. After they got off the ark, Noah's ark, they all went down. There were only 8 of them. And it is from those 8 that all of mankind repopulated the earth. Well, they were there in that Mesopotamian region. The ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, there in modern Turkey. And so they came down from those mountains, down into that region, between the two rivers. That's why it's called Mesopotamia, between the rivers. Tigris to the north, Euphrates to the south. And it is from that region that mankind repopulated the earth. But when it became clear that there was not enough space for all the people, they decided, sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, to divide up the land by lot. So they held a little lottery. And what happened was that Ham got the land to the south, including what is today known as the Nile Valley area, including what is today called North Africa, abutting the Mediterranean Sea. Japheth got the land to the north, in the cooler climes in what is today Turkey, and going to the west of Turkey into the Balkans, into southeastern Europe, what is today Italy and Greece and etc., and also to the east of what is today Turkey, into the areas between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, those areas. Okay, southeastern Europe or far western Asia, that region. And then Shem got the land in the middle, which includes what is today Iraq, what is today Iran, what is today the Arabian Peninsula, what is today the subcontinent of India. But when you read Jubilees chapter 8, you will see that the division did not encompass all of the earth, because it was demarcated by various mountain ranges and by various rivers. So it wasn't the whole earth that was so divided up. And that is how come, as referred to in the book of 2nd Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 to 45, as already referenced, at the time of the Assyrian invasion and captivity, you could have that the northern tribes were scattered into lands where, quote unquote, never before mankind dwelt. So all those lands to which the northern tribes were scattered became the answer to this question of promised lands, because as soon as their foot hit that land belonged to them. And part of what is described there in 2nd Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 to 45 was that they had agreed amongst themselves to keep the law in these lands to which they were scattered, the very law that caused them to be scattered in the first place, because they were not keeping the law there in the inheritance land where the northern tribes, they'd kind of gone apostate once the northern tribes had separated from the southern tribes. They tried to set up their own arrangements, separate and distinct from what was ordained in the book. But they said when they got to these promised lands, they would keep the law. And that's why you have that provision there in 2nd Ether that I was reading, where it says that if they don't keep the law, that they would be swept off when their iniquity becomes ripe. And that is how come the kings of Spain and Portugal could end up, in effect, being given rights to invade that place, certainly the Americas, okay, and basically took down the Israelite kingdoms that had been established in the Americas. the Aztecs there in Mexico, the Incas there in Peru, the Mayas there in Central America, although they never did quite take down the Mayas, but that's another story. But the point is, the Spanish conquistadors came and were able to do that. And even before the Spanish conquistadors came, already in around 1200 AD, which is 1900 years after the first scattering of the northern tribes over there to the Americas, 1900 years later, is when the Mongolians under Genghis Khan mounted an invasion. That's there documented in the book written by John Rankin. They came over here to the Americas using these Chinese treasure vessels because the Mongolians had already conquered China. And China had the naval capacity, the ocean-going vessels that could be used to make that journey across the Pacific. So the Mongolians came and took down the Aztec Empire, which was originally Israelite, took down the Inca Empire, which was originally Israelite. They killed men, married the Israelite women. So the paternal bloodline of the Aztecs, by the time the Spanish came, the paternal bloodline of the royal houses of the Aztecs were no longer Israelite. Of the Incas were no longer Israelite. And over toward the eastern side where the Mayas were, they had not been so taken over by the Mongolian invasion. And so the Maya people remained, in terms of its paternal bloodline of the royal houses, remained Israelite. But because Mongolian seed had been injected over into the Americas, by and by, even the Mayas became sort of mixed as a people. You understand? So that when 200 years or so later Columbus came, they would have seen a range of phenotypes of the people here present in the Americas. They would have seen the Negro type, the Garifuna people who were still there in the eastern Central America, Honduras, Belize, Guatemala. They're still there, and they were there also in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Okay, they will see a Negro type. They saw a Negro type down in the Guyanas. They saw Negro types in various other places. But they also saw Mongolian types, and they saw people who tended to reflect a mix of Negro and Mongolian. Okay, with some Chinese also present, because it was Chinese naval expertise that brought them over here. So there were Chinese there, a few, but the soldierly forces were essentially Mongolian, and they came, as I said, around 1200 or so AD, when the Negroes, the Israelites, had come over to the Americas as early as 700 BC. And there might have been some even prior to that. Okay, so from 700 BC to 1200 AD, that's 1900 years. That's almost 2,000 years of pure Negro, and all the evidence is there, the Olmec heads, all those paintings and etc., sculptures and paintings on the walls and etc., that let you to know that it was a Negro people that were here for that length of time. And the Mongolian injection of seed only came much, much later. But of course, they've tried to confuse the narrative and essentially tell the lie that the original or the aboriginal or the native people of the Americas are essentially a Mongolian phenotype. No, it was Negro to begin with for a long time. And of course the Negro type has remained here, but they have advanced the narrative that the Negro only came after Columbus and the European invasion and came um, together with the transatlantic slave trade. So that's the lie that they've tried to advance. And along with that lie to advance the idea that the original native of the Americas were Mongolian people, like the Navajo and etc., and the Apache and a few tribes out west like that. But when you come to the eastern seaboard, the original tribes that were here present when the Europeans came, whether it was the Spanish or whether later it was the English, were essentially a Negro people. And the evidence of that is abundant, abundant. Okay, so, but under the book of Ether, chapter 2, verse 9, it says, if we do not keep the law, we're going to be swept off. And that's how come the Most High first of all sent the Mongolians over, and then later on sent the conquistadors over, and then later on sent the English privateers and etc., the Plymouth Rock people and the Mayflower people, and all of those also came. And the Dutch came and the French came, and it was a free-for-all. And that's how come the original people, the aboriginal people of the Americas, which were Negro, which were Israelite of the bloodline Abram, Isaac, Jacob, which is what the Negro by definition is, because Negro is just a word. When you go back to the Paleo-Hebrew, it means those people of the same tribal root as the Nega David. A Nega was a praise title used for King David that came to mean king. And that Nega title means he that is watched over by the Most High, the sort of apple of his eye. And that's how come Nega came to mean king. Well, the people of Nega David were known as Negro, or Nige, or Negara, words like that. And that word goes back all the way to Paleo-Hebrew. You understand? So it doesn't mean, they've tried now to hide that meaning, and as I've gone into it in some length and in some detail in chapter 2 of the book, Coming of David Messiah, it doesn't etymologically derive from 15th century Spanish and Portuguese negro, meaning quote-unquote black. No, it means people who are of the bloodline, tribal root as the Nega David. And that's clear. I mean, I go and look at it. I've dealt with that in various uploads, and it's there at some length in the book. So we were the aboriginal people of this land, and in a sense we were swept off it, not in the sense, swept off in the sense that our ownership of it, our possession of it was taken away from us, and it was given to these other people. To some extent, the Mongolians, and certainly to a large extent to the Spanish and to the British and to the Portuguese and to the other European powers. Okay? Now, this is important. I mean, even when you look at the history, the Carib people here in the Caribbean that give the name to this place that's called the Caribbean. The Carib people are by paternal bloodline, they are Mongolian. On the maternal side, it's still very Israelite. So they are a mixed people. But the paternal line is Mongolian, it is not Israelite. You understand? So that the claim to the land ultimately is going to revert to the original owners. How do we know that? Because it's there. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Because the ones who took over the land, they also violate the condition. They haven't kept the law. They came spreading Christianity, so-called, but and trying to sort of advance the law of the Holy Covenant, but they haven't kept it. And so in turn, they are being swept off the land. Let me continue reading here. Let me go back at the top. These are lands that were not part of the division agreed to by the sons of Noah. That's the Americas. That's Sub-Saharan Africa. That's Western Europe. That's Eastern Europe. That's Eastern Asia. That's South Pacific. That's how come you have the Negro people down there in Fiji, for example, down there in Hawaii, down there originally the ones there in New Zealand, down there in Tasmania, those who were completely wiped out, those were all Negro people. All right, let me carry on. We know for sure, as a matter of simple inference, that the Americas were not included, since given, included in that Jubilee's 8th division, that is, since given specifically to Israel, and with the condition that they keep the law of Yahweh, failing which they would be swept off the land, which was what was there in Ether chapter 2 verse 9. And likewise, all who came to this promised land were under the same stricture and condition. Moreover, when the northern tribes were scattered out of the original homeland, the inheritance land over there, in what is today called the land of Israel, they went to lands where, quote, never mankind dwelt, unquote. That was 2nd Esdras chapter 13, verse 41, as already mentioned. Therefore, we are invited to infer that the covenant of Jubilees chapter 8 among the 3 sons of Noah did not apply to these lands to which the Israelites were scattered. In all these lands, the scattered Israelites and later the Judahites lived in peace, in unwalled villages. They became the quote-unquote natives of all these far-flung parts of the world. And to all these lands, Gog and Magog, and in some cases led by Edom, for Esau, Edom mixed in early with the Amagog, came up behind to colonize and enslave. So these were the heathens. All right, I'll stop there in terms of this reading. I'm coming to now Venezuela and Guyana, because Venezuela is, as a state, it has inherited what was there set up originally by the Spanish. And Venezuela and those other lands, Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, there were 5 of them, I may not have remembered them all, that were what's the word, liberated by El Gran Libertador, Bolivar, Simon Bolivar, they got rid of the European sort of imposition, Spanish imposition, because by that time those lands in South America were still very much, you had the European at the top socially, but then you also had all the Negroes that were still there. You had all the sort of Mongolian seed that were there after the Mongolian kind of invasion. So you had what in America they call them, I think, Native Americans, but who are the sort of the Mongolian sort of typical people. Like in the Caribbean, it would be the Caribs, as distinct from the original Arawak. The Arawak were straight up Negro people. And that word Arawak is interesting because it comes from the Hebrew Iyere Waka, where Iyere is the name of this land of Trinidad, which is the promised land, Iyere. It's just that same word that is now, translated in English as Jireh, meaning providence, like Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Well, this land, Trinidad, was given the name Iyere by the original Iyerewaka people, which is the Arawak people. Iyerewaka meaning those who are of the Iyere line, but over here on this side. In other words, God sort of ordained, God provided people that were brought over to this land. And that's why you have the sort of generic term Arawak for all the people, all the original people that were here. But by the time the Mongolian invasion had taken place and you had the wave of because the Caribs came and basically they genocided the Arawak. In the case of Trinidad, the genocide was essentially complete. And then after the Carib genocided the Arawak, in other words, they came, they killed the men, they married the women. Then the Spanish came and engaged in a program of genocide against the Carib, but didn't fully succeed. So there's still a remnant of Carib here in this land. And all up and down the Caribbean. Right? And well, I've dealt with, there's another name for the Carib called Kalinago. But meaning, the key point here being that the Carib are not Israelite by paternal bloodline. So that their claim to the land is vitiated because it's a bloodline claim ultimately. And the land is being brought back to those to whom it was originally given. And that is determined by paternal bloodline, back to the original Israelite people. So you have the Venezuelans whose claim go back only to Spain. Although with the liberation movement of Simon Bolivar, one could kind of maybe make the claim that he was acting on behalf of the original owners, which would have included the original Arawak people who were Israelites. So there is some degree of that. I don't know to what extent it is valid. And certainly when Chavez came along talking about the second Bolivarian revolution, he made many times a sort of claim that it was a tri-racial sort of harking back to European bloodlines, African bloodlines, and we call it mestizo bloodlines, Carib, Amerindian, whatever you want to call it. And they're sort of misnomered because we were the Afro bloodline really was a Negro bloodline that was there long before any kind of Mongolian claim that was there. And certainly predated Columbus and definitely predated the slave trade. Right? But Chavez was the sort of face of this non-European claim to the land. All right, so to that extent, one can make the argument, I am not making it now, but one can make that argument that Venezuela is asserting a claim that would have the land go back to its original owners, which was bloodline Israelite. On the other side of the matter, you have Guyana, whose claim goes back to Britain. And British claims to that land are there's no real good, solid, valid British claim to the land except you want to use a law of war as the basis of the claim. In other words, if they come and they take it by force, the booty then belongs to them. That's the only logic that can kind of support any British claim to that land. Otherwise, they have none. Certainly less so than the Spanish. And now Guyana essentially has gone over to brown Esau because the Indian indentures from India that were brought in by the British have risen in that land to take over. So they now are they're the beneficial owners of that land. It's no longer, they're not representing the Aboriginal people that were there. They're representing brown Esau. They are another heathen people, dedicated to taking what is not theirs, as I dealt with in the previous upload. And I quoted from F.E.M. Hossein back in the 1920s. And essentially, he was saying that they would come to own, in the case of Trinidad, they would come to own Trinidad in the field, in the office, and in the shop. That's a heathen kind of a program. And he backed it up by saying, well, it has already happened in Mauritius, which is an island off the east coast there of Africa, originally a Negro land. And there the Indians have taken over. And you can go to Fiji in the South Pacific, Negro land again. The Fijians are essentially originally a people of the tribe of Reuben, is what I have been given. And the British brought in the indentures from India, and there too they have risen to rule. Okay, so this is just, colonization part 2. Heathen entity part 2. In the sense of colonization, in the sense of a foreign imposition coming into a land that is not theirs, to rape, to pillage, to plunder, to colonize, to enslave. So on the Guyanese side of the dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, the people there, and I go by bloodlines, that's how scripture goes. The bloodlines there that are asserting the claim, yes, it's derived from the British, but the ones who are now asserting the claim are essentially bloodline Edomites coming out of India, brown Esau. That's what that is. But we now living in a time when the land ownership is going to revert to its original owners, which is bloodline Israel. And this is what we see in Deuteronomy 30 that was prophesied. And it shall come to pass, Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 1, it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have said before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither Jehovah thy God hath driven thee, and shalt return unto Jehovah thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thy soul. So this is a great awakening now, where Negro Israel has awoken, knowing that we are the children of Israel, knowing that we have suffered the curses, which is why we had these foreign impositions upon us, and we became the colonized and enslaved peoples of the world. But now, having suffered that curse, having awakened, returning unto the Lord, he says, verse 3, that then Jehovah thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither Jehovah thy God had scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will Jehovah thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. In other words, he's going to bring us back, regardless of where we might have been scattered. And Jehovah thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed. So that's the inheritance land over there in Israel. But it is also all the promised lands all over the world. And thou shalt possess it. That's the key point here. So he's bringing back bloodline Israel into possession of the land. Now, in the case of Venezuela-Guyana dispute, whether he does it through Venezuela, it becomes a question. But he certainly will not do it through Guyana, because Guyana is there, beneficial ownership is there with the brown Esau. And he goes on to say, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord, Jehovah thy God, will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed to love Jehovah thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. And verse 7, and Jehovah thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies, and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. So you know it's not going to go to brown Esau, that land. But this is just a sort of tip of the iceberg, letting you know that this is a larger program there that is at work. The other part of that iceberg is over there in the inheritance land of Israel, where those people who are not bloodline Israel, but who are occupying that land, pretending to be bloodline Israel, are being evicted. And they answer to Revelation chapter 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 9, which says what? I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. and are rather the synagogue of Satan. That's why they don't fear God. That is Amalek, the Edomite seed. And because they've made that covenant with Satan, they don't fear God. Because they know they have nothing to get from the Lord, Yahweh of the children of Israel. And that's there in a video I think I made reference to in an earlier, I think the book The Appointed Time, The Tarrying in His Fate, by one Harold Rosenthal. He came flat out and said this is a Jewish guy. He was an aide to Senator Jacob Javits there in the United States. And he came right out and said that the so-called Jews today, they serve Lucifer. Lucifer is their God. And while they have had the dominion, it seemed as though they could get away with anything, which they have. But now, times and half the time was all the time they were given to exercise the dominion. By the sword shalt thou live, using craft, witchcraft, okay, using their covenants with Satan, with Lucifer. That is not working for them anymore. And that's why they are being evicted as we speak from that land, the inheritance land of Israel, which is not theirs to occupy. They don't know they're being evicted, but this is all what they're doing is serving to fulfill essentially that word that has been spoken upon them, which is that they're being evicted. And everywhere else that were promised lands, a similar kind of eviction is going to take place. How exactly it's going to work out in that Essequibo dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, I have no idea. But it is part of this larger program of the land reverting to the owners that the Most High has given it to, which are the children of Israel. And that is what we see very plainly spoken in Psalms number 2. Ask of me, and I shall give the heathen for thine inheritance. Meaning they're going to serve in the kingdom. All the heathen powers, Esau, Ishmael, Moab, Ammon, all of them. And I shall give thee the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. But we just have to ask. We have to return to and obey his law. No, I don't think we need to ask for those lands that were there from the original Jubilee's 8th division. So the lands of the Nile Valley, that belongs to Ham. I don't want to take that away from them. The lands of Japhet, nowadays, or in scripture called the Isles of the Gentiles, Turkey and the Balkan areas and those areas there immediately north of the Mesopotamian region, that's there for Japhet. I don't want to take that from them. And then the lands in the middle, Iraq, Iran, the Arabian Peninsula, the subcontinent of India, those lands were given to Shem, not being Israel. So the Elamites and the Aramites and etc., let them keep those lands. But all the other lands where never before mankind dwelt, as discussed at 2 Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 to 45, which means all of the Americas, which means Northern Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Asia, South Pacific, Sub-Sahara Africa, all those lands are the promised lands of Israel. And we should insist that those lands revert back to Israel. So that's what is now working itself out. And so with that, I give all praise, I give all glory, I give all thanks, I give all exaltation unto the Most High God, Yahweh. And to all those still listening, I say shalom.